I heard a story about a rabbi. Actually, I should say hello before I get right into this. I'll be a mensch. Hello. Have a good week. This shiur is dedicated to the memory of Rachaleah Bas Reb Chaim Tzvi. And just all have a good week. So we'll begin with questions. I heard a story about a rabbi. It may have been the Chafetz Chaim, who first said he wanted to change the world, and then said he wanted to change his country, and then said he wanted to change his community and then his family, and then decided to change himself. And at the end, he accomplished just that, which I think is the point of the story. He wouldn't have changed himself if he had decided to change everyone else instead of working on himself. But if this is the Chafetz Chaim or some other great rabbi, then he did actually change others, I'm sure. He's probably still changing others, even though he changed himself. So my question is, how do we, as women and mothers, go about changing ourselves when most of our lives are dedicated to changing or raising others? Don't we have to focus on the development of our husbands and children? Thank you for the answer. Okay, so the way that you work on yourself is through giving others. Why am I saying that so decisively? So the reason is that being a developed person means finding the part of oneself that's in Hashem's image and giving that a voice. Of all of Hashem's attributes, the one that's most accessible, the one that's most available to us, and the one that's the cause of so many other possibilities within us to come forward, is midas hachesed, is our capacity to give. So working on yourself without midas hachesed is almost impossible. So the more you really work towards the development of others, the more the part of you that's compassionate, that's kind, that's self-transcendent, that's eternal, comes into play. So the Chafetz Chaim could have just as easily said the same thing in reverse. The more he gives others, the more he'll develop himself. It works in both directions. However, if you're not honest, and this is why the Chafetz Chaim probably put it in the way that he did, it's very easy to develop others, not as an act of kindness, but just out of the will to give forth, which is something else. Meaning, the same way we want to water plants, but we don't want to be plants. We like to give forth, but we don't necessarily like to change. So there are people who could give forth and who don't change. They exclude themselves from the process. But a person who doesn't exclude themselves definitely will develop as they develop others. So I'll give you an example of this. Just last week I attended the funeral of Rav Noach Weinberg of Torah. So at the funeral somebody told me that on Aish.com they had asked people to send in names of people whose lives were affected either directly or indirectly by Rav Noach. So when you realize what that encompasses, it's, Aish Torah, Aish.com, the families of all of the Aish rabbis. So how many people do you think actually answered and gave their names? So I would have, just knowing that people don't always bother, I would have said maybe 50,000. So the first book to come in was 86,000, and I think it was 721. But there were 5 more books. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, and those are just the people who responded, who said that their lives were changed by one person. How do you think that affected him? So again, he wasn't a person who was the gardener watering the garden but not being the garden. Everything that he said, he lived, so it was magnified through the amount of chesed that he did. And this is possible for any mother and for any wife. Okay, 3.5 years ago, this is another question, I married a man. Well, that's good already, better than other possibilities. Okay, we were both 25, who I had fallen in love with, but had been diagnosed with cancer. The cancer was very rare, and no one knew how to treat it effectively. He had been diagnosed when he was 18, and despite the diagnosis, he was living his life to the fullest and was coping relatively well. The cancer was very slow growing, and despite all of his treatments, he went to college, got a law degree, and was now starting his first job. I'm saying all of this because I need you to know that I went into the relationship and marriage with my eyes open. To cut a long story short, we had a baby girl in 2007 and our life was wonderful. However, 1 week before Rosh Hashanah, that would be September 2008, he went on a business trip and the next morning he didn't wake up. I lost my husband at age 29 and now I'm alone with my 18-month-old daughter. I haven't been searching for the answer, why did this happen, or how could Hashem do this? But what I have been searching for is, what could I do with my suffering? How do I take what's happened to me and make something of it? What's the direction and purpose that I'm supposed to now be filled with? I feel that I can't let something like this happen to me and just keep going on the same way I was before. But I don't know what to do. Real cheshbon nefesh is so difficult. And when I pick up things that I need to change, they seem trivial in light of what's happened. Can you help me discover how I'm supposed to use my suffering? So this, of course, is a very big question. What I would suggest